Okay, so we're in the book of Philippians, and in case you don't know where we are in the book of Philippians, here is like a chart of the whole book. There's 4 chapters in Philippians, and back in December-ish, we did the first 2 chapters. Then this series is talking about the last 2 chapters, and today, next slide, we're going to talk about this section right here. So we're going to be talking about chapter 3, verses 4 through 11 today. Now, I want to start off by making this statement, and this is going to be what we're going to be talking about today, which is this. Some things have value for a certain amount of time or within a certain social circle. Some things have value for a certain amount of time in a certain environment, a certain social circle. I'll give you an example. So when I was in high school, I don't know if they do this still. I don't know. Maybe high schoolers, you could confirm or say, no, we don't do that anymore. So when you're in high school and if you're an athlete, you get like a Letterman's jacket, right? Okay, the high school I went to, there's all these jocks walking around with their cool jackets and everyone's like, ooh, ah. But, like people like me who aren't like that athletic, that's like a dream that we could never achieve, right? So our school, they were like, hey, we should promote people who get good grades. Let's get a nerd jacket. So there's something called an academic jacket, or we call it the Akajack, and it's our school colors. And wait, that's funny? Akajack, is that not? I thought it was cool. When I was in high school, Akajack was like the goal. And what you do is you have to have a GPA above a certain amount of GPA. And once the school confirms that that's your GPA, then the booster club, they raise money and they buy you a jacket. Now, my school colors, I went to Westchester High School. Westchester? Nobody? Oh, yeah? No, well, thanks for support. Yeah. Wait, is Melissa here? Oh, she's not here. Okay, she's also Westchester alum. Okay, our colors were red and white. So if you can just imagine, I'm like wearing there's this red jacket with white leather, which is probably fake, right? And it has like the red and white stripes on where you have your thing, and it was, your collar has the red, but it has the white stripe in it, and it has your name etched in, like it's sewn into here, so everybody knows it's you. It's different from the athletic one because if you're a great sportsman, you have like your jersey number etched onto your side, and anyways. I remember trying really hard to get the Akajack. I really wanted it because, in school, you have your own group of people you hang out with. It turns out I was always hanging out with the smart people, and I was the least smart of the group. So I just wanted to make sure I was part of that group. So I would work really hard. I knew that my grade GPA was just below the line. So I worked really hard, and eventually I got the grades up a little bit. So I went to the office, and I said, here's my grade. I just want to make sure that you got the same grade I have. And we looked at it and said, yes. And said, Kotz, congratulations. You are now going to have an Akajack. And I'm like, yes. And there's a whole ceremony. Okay. It's at night, so you come to school at night, and there's a big auditorium, and there's like all the parents and all the other students are there, and all the people who are getting the Akajack are supposed to wear like a nice white shirt with a tie, and if you're a girl, you have to wear a blouse. And then you're sitting up on stage, and they call you one by one, and you come up, and they say, next person to receive an Akajack, me. I go up, and I'm like, hey, everybody, there's a photographer there, so you put it on, they take a picture of you putting it on, and then you pose for the camera, and then you sit down. And you look at it, because all your friends are up there, because you hang out with the smart kids. We're looking at each other like, we are the coolest kids here. That's what we thought. Okay, now, I'm the class of 98. Actually, for you guys over there, that's old, but for everybody else, like, God, you're so young. Class of 98? Okay. My sister is 2 years older than me, and she got an Akajack when she was a senior in high school. Okay? And she went off to Cal Berkeley. One summer, she was visiting us, and she said, hey, Kotz, just so you know, I know you're happy to get your Akajack. Do not, words of wisdom from your older sister, do not wear your Akajack in college. I'm like, what? This is so cool. What are you talking about, right? But I listened to her wisdom, and I decided I'm not going to wear my Akajack. I didn't even pack it, right? So I went to UCLA, and and then eventually my first year at UCLA, I started to form my own little friend group. And in this group was a jock from a different high school, from a different city. I don't remember what city he's from. It's a really tiny city. And he would always wear his Letterman's jacket. And you guys know what I'm talking about when I say that there's like that one person in your group that tells the same story over and over and over again, right? Like your group meets another group of people, and in that group over there, you're like, oh, he's sharing the same story again. And then we meet another group of people, and then that guy shares the same story again. It's almost like that's the only story he has on his list of stories to tell. The story goes like this. There we were, fourth quarter, football. 20 seconds left on the clock. We're down by 3. I have to make this. He's a quarterback. He's like, I have to make this huge pass, right? And so I said, hike, I got the ball. And now everybody's running down. This is going to be a long one, right? And there's one person open, there's another person open, but no, wait, that guy's covered. What am I supposed to do? So he throws the ball really far. It goes, and everything's in slow motion. Everything is quiet. And then all of a sudden he catches the ball, touchdown, and everybody runs to me and they put me on their shoulders. And that's the story. You could kind of imagine. It's from like a TV show almost, like a movie. He tells that story over and over and over again, to a point where after a while, my circle of friends, we know how the story goes. We could almost recite it, right? And every time he tells the story, and he's like, and that is how I got this. He pulls out his jacket, he puts it on. We're in college, okay? He walks around campus with his jacket on, and I started to understand what my sister was referring to, right? Like, oh yeah, that's not cool, because it tells me a few things about this person. First, his best days are behind him, right? And number 2 is like, okay, so yeah, like you're in college now, buddy, and high school football is nothing compared to college football. So that jacket had value for a certain amount of time, right? You could look back and say, oh, that was a very valuable time in my life. That's cool. But that jacket had more value in high school in that circle of your friends or your classmates than it does now that you're in college. So there are certain things in your life that have value for a certain amount of time, right? For like a certain social circle. And you guys probably know what I'm talking about, especially for those of you who are out of high school. You guys know what I'm talking about, right? Because you thought about, man, I remember back in the day when I thought popularity was the most important thing. Popularity, being the coolest kid in school, has value for that time in that social circle, right? Or maybe you thought, like, oh man, I remember back in the day when the best dress was the most important thing. That one day when you had a bad hair day, and that one day when you were wearing the colors that don't match or whatever, right? You look back and say, well, that wasn't a big deal. Considering life, living this long, I look back and realize it's not that big a deal anymore. But the way you look back then had a lot of value in that certain social circle, but now it doesn't really matter, right? What sport you played in high school had value at one point, but now you're in your 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and it's like, it doesn't really matter, right? There are values that seem like it's everything to you at that moment, but eventually you look back and you have better perspective and you realize it doesn't hold that much value. Now, what you also discover is you start asking these questions, like who gives these things value? Like, for example, if you're in elementary school, and I know this because I have 2 kids and one of them is still in elementary school, every once in a while they'll come to me and say, this is what I need to get to be cool. Well, they won't say those words, but I know that's what they mean, right? Like, I need to get 100 more Pokemon cards. I need to complete my set. I need to get this game. I need to wear this. Right? Who told you that? Well, so-and-so did, or a certain group of people told me. As a parent, that child is living, that's their reality, that's their entire world. So you want to enter into their world and say, you're right, that is a big deal. But in the back of your mind, like when you're my age, you look back, you're going to realize that's not really a big deal. But when you're in middle school, I have to wear this, I have to talk like this, I have to do, where did that come from? Well, there's a group of people that tell me that's how we're supposed to act. It's like, okay, you enter into the world and say, that's how they talk, that's how they do. Okay, I get it. Okay, but from my perspective, in the back of my mind, I know, consider all things, that really is not a big deal. It doesn't hold that much value from my perspective, right? But the older you get, like you're in college, you need to make sure you get good grades. You want to make sure you have good connections. You want to make sure you have that internship. And you're like, who told you that? Right? And you realize, depending on who tells you what has value, the older you get, you realize they actually do hold value. Because, what they say to you as a kid doesn't seem to have much value, but when you're older, when you're in when you're working and your boss tells you this is what has value in our company, then you have to say, well, I guess that's true. That's where I am in life, right? So after a while, you realize, okay, when I was this age, this had value, but when I'm at the next stage in my life, that doesn't hold value anymore because this holds value. And then when you move into the next stage of your life, you realize that doesn't have value, but this does. And you realize, wow, if value systems change throughout my life, then do I really, like, doesn't it feel like whatever effort I put myself into, like whatever I poured myself into at this age, doesn't really matter anymore because eventually there's going to be another value system I have to do well in, right? And you start to wonder, is there anything that holds value from birth to death? Is there some ultimate value that I could pour myself into and realize it's not worthless? Because value, depending on when you receive those value systems, eventually it's not going to be worth anything. It's like that Akajack or the Leatherman's jacket, right? At one point had value, and I worked really hard for it, but in hindsight, it really doesn't matter. So is there something that does hold value? Or the question that we should ask is this: what has the most value? What has value that surpasses all time? And if we could say that, like, hey, depending on what this person says, that's what's valuable in that stage of my life. Depending on what this person says, maybe the question we should be asking is not what holds the most value, but maybe the question we should be asking is, what does God claim to be of most value? Because if God is the one that tells us what's most important, and He is the God of the universe, then maybe that's the thing that holds the most value in our lives. That at no point in our lives can we look back and say, oh, that was worthless. So what is that thing that God holds most value? Now, for those of you who have been going to church, or maybe you haven't been going to church, and you've been looking at church from the outside in, you might start thinking like, oh, I know what the pastor's going to say, right? It's how many verses you've memorized, right? Or is it attendance, like how often you go to church? That holds value, right? Or is it, it's the offering basket, isn't it? Like it's how much you give into the, like that's what holds value. Or better, no, it's how perfect your family seems to the people around you at church. That's what holds value. So what is the thing that God values most? Well, what we're going to look at today is we're going to be looking at a portion of the book of Philippians where the writer, his name is Paul. He's like one of the first Christian pastors. He reflects on the value system that he thought that God held at highest value. He's going to look at it and say, this is what I thought it was. This is what that was all about. So I poured myself into it. As a matter of fact, I poured everything that I am into it. And as it turns out, I was way off. And the reason why we're going to be talking about this today is because I want to make sure that everybody here understands what holds the most value and where should you be investing your life into. So let's take a look at what Paul writes. The context of this is he's writing a letter to a church in a place called Philippi. And there's a group of people there who are like I'm better than you. I'm better than you. Nah, 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 nah. And Paul's like, stop the comparison game thing that you're playing right now. And this is how he starts. He says this: if someone else thinks they have reason to put confidence in the flesh, and the flesh, there's a lot of study that goes behind this term, the flesh, but for our sake, we're just going to say our reputation, how we seem, like how close we seem like we are to God. Okay, so if there's anybody here that wants to brag about how good they look to God, that how God is like, oh, look at Kotz, he is the best. If you want to have that reputation, Paul says, well, I have more. My list of accomplishments is way longer than yours. So like Paul seems like he's playing this game with you. He's like, hey, you think you're holy? You think you're the best Christian? You want to see my resume? This is how he starts. I was circumcised on the 8th day, to which you're like, what? Okay. There's a bunch of rules in the Old Testament about what you're supposed to do with your baby when they're born. On the 8th day, you're supposed to go and get your baby circumcised. Paul says, my parents are so religious. My parents are so close to God, they followed every single rule in the Old Testament. And guess what? I am a recipient of that. Like I was born into the right family. So he starts off by saying this: you want to know how close I am to God? You know how good I am in my life? I was born into the right family. Okay? But when it comes to circumcision, there's a whole group of people who've been circumcised, right? So he said, let me get more specific. I'm also of the people of Israel. So of all the people who are circumcised, he's like, there's a subset of that called Israelites. I happen to be one of those. He's basically saying, I am God's chosen race. Not impressed? He's like, well then, he says, I'm also part of the tribe of Benjamin, meaning in Israel, there's 12 tribes. One of them is called Benjamin. And he's like, Benjamin, that's my tribe. That's where the first King Saul came from the tribe. Like, I have royalty running in my blood, right? And then he says, and not only that, I'm a Hebrew of Hebrews. I'm 100% Jewish. Okay, in case I lost you here, here's some stick figures to demonstrate what I'm talking about. Of all the people in the world, there's a few people who are circumcised. Next slide. So these yellow, right here, okay? Not impressed? Well, guess what? Of all the people who are circumcised, next slide, there's only a few who call themselves Israelites. And of all the people who call themselves Israelites, I am part of the tribe of Benjamin. And of all the people who call themselves the tribe of Benjamin, I am the Hebrew of Hebrews. What is he saying? He's saying, you want to know how holy I am? You want to know how godly I am, how close I am to God, and how God loves me more than everybody else in the world? You want to know? Look at my resume. Now, to which, if you're listening carefully, you'll probably be like, but Paul, yeah, okay, we get it. You're privileged and you were born into the right family and the right tribe or the right race and all that kind of stuff. That's great. But you didn't do anything to deserve this. I mean, like, you didn't say anything about what you did to get close to God. He's like, oh, I'm about to get there. He goes on. He says, so when it comes to following rules, when it comes to the law, you want to know how I do at following rules? I am a Pharisee. Who is a Pharisee? A Pharisee is somebody, it's a sect of Judaism back then, people who memorize the scriptures front to back. I did some research on the Pharisees, and what I discovered is they were required to memorize every single word from Genesis to Malachi, the whole Old Testament. And if you were to quiz these Pharisees, I want you to list all the animals that are in the Bible in order from Genesis to Malachi. They'll be like, okay, and they'll start going boom, 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 boom. Now, do it backwards, like, no problem, boom, 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 boom. Like, these guys have everything memorized. It's like, you want to know how much work I put into being close to God? I memorized the Bible. Okay, that's your brain though, right? Like, what about your heart? Does your heart really love God? He's like, well, I'm glad you asked, because when it comes for zeal, my passion, you want to know what my passion is? It's like, I love God so much that I'm willing to murder. I persecuted the church. I love God so much, I'm willing to kill for it. To which he shouldn't really brag about because it's bad. But who Paul was back then, he was like, that's how much I was passionate about God. Well, okay, we won't get into that. Okay, then he says, well, you want to know how well I was at following these rules? He's like, well, as for righteousness based on the law, how good I was at following these rules by God, I was faultless. I made no mistakes. I dare you to find another person who's better at following these rules in the Bible than me. It's like, okay, so you were born into the right family and you did all the right things. What is the point that Paul's making here? He's saying this: I was the best of best. But the next line is interesting because he starts the next line by saying, but. What do you mean, but? Like, what, however, what do you mean by this, Paul? Like, that you just impressed us. Everybody in the room is quiet now because we thought, we were all talking about who's closer to God. You just made your point. We think you're the closest to God. What do you mean, but? But whatever were gains to me, I now consider loss for the sake of Christ. He says, all the things I just listed, my resume that I just gave you right now, all that stuff has zero value to me now. That value of getting closer to God through doing all these things, that had major value in my life in the first half of my life. But now looking back, I realize it is a waste of time. What? Yeah. What do you mean by that, Paul? Well, he continues the next verse. What is more, I consider everything a loss because of the surpassing worth of knowing Christ Jesus, my Lord, for whose sake I have lost all things. He said, I learned something about this whole system of value, and now that I learned this, it's cost me everything. Everything that I built up in my whole life, it's all gone now. But I don't feel like I lost anything because I gained something better. Okay, so what are you talking about? Okay, to show you how passionate Paul is here, I'm going to let you know a little secret, okay? The Bible, the New Testament, was originally written in Greek. And every once in a while, there's like a really bad word in there, like a curse word. So the translators are like, we can't put that in the Bible, right? So they try to find like a tamer word. We're going to look at one of those tame words right now, but I'm going to tell you what the word actually means. It says this: I consider them garbage. This is the tame word. The word here in the Greek is the word skubulon. Skubulon basically means, this is church, I can't say it, huh? I'll put it this way. One of the translators of the Bible, his name is Eugene Peterson, he translated this word skubulon as dog dung. It's a pile of garbage. Okay, so he says, everything that I did, memorizing the Bible, being born into the right family, right, following the rules, having so much passion for God, all that stuff, it's crap. Wow, Paul, that's like strong words there. That I may gain Christ and be found in him. What is he talking about? I don't know if you guys can see this. I have two cups here. Object lesson. So it turns out our resources are very limited. The amount of time we put into certain things is limited. There's times when we have to choose. So for example, if you believe your value in high school is studies, you're like, oh, good. I'm going to study. I'm going to put my time and effort and, I'm going to put into this cup of getting straight A's. I'm going to keep doing that. But then you realize, oh, but I also want to have friends, right? Okay, well, I'm going to do that. Well, can't you do both? Sure, I could do both. I'm studying with my friends, but there's going to eventually come a time where my friends are going to invite me to a movie, and I'm like, no, I got to study. So I guess I'm just, pour into this. You're very limited. You can't do both sometimes. But every once in a while, you come across a situation where you're like, well, what holds value for me right now is making sure that I pass my test. And that's a good thing. So I'm just going to keep pouring into this. But because it's really hard for human beings to stay balanced on a lot of things. We keep putting things into one cup, and one day we realize, oh no, I've neglected my friends. Right? And this is what Paul's talking about. It's like my whole life I've been trying to please God, get close to God. I'm trying to do everything I can to be religious. I wanted to make sure that everybody knows that I know the Bible forwards and backwards. I want to make sure that everybody knows that I have this crazy passion for God. I'm willing to kill for it, right? And he realizes now that I look back at my life, I don't know what I was doing here. It is a waste. This is garbage. This is skubulon. I wish I could take back this time in my life. I wasted so many hours investing in the wrong things. In other words, Paul here is saying, I discovered something new. You see, the thing is, when I learned about Jesus, and when I encountered Jesus, and I got to know Jesus, I started falling in love with Jesus, my mind started to change. I started seeing the world differently. What he's saying here is this. He's saying, the closer we get to Jesus, the more we discover which cup has more value. Right? So you spend more time with Jesus, the more you realize, what am I doing? This isn't what's most important. Sure, it's important to me right now, and I should, I'm not saying like getting good grades is a bad thing. If that's the value system of the world that you're in right now, invest in that, right? But don't neglect the things that are more important, the more things that are more eternal. And he says, I was doing whatever I thought was right at the time. But in hindsight, I realized I should have been putting more into this other cup. And I didn't know that. I didn't see it clear until I got to know Jesus. The more I get to know Jesus, the more clear it is to me what has eternal value and what has temporary value. So, what is it? Right? Paul, it sounds like you're saying that you know Jesus quite well. And because you know Jesus really well, can you tell us what has eternal value? Or the question we asked earlier. What does God claim to be of most value? Now, we could read on chapter 3, because we're right here. We're in Genesis. We're in Philippians chapter 3 right now. And you're thinking, if I keep reading, maybe Paul will reveal to us what is of most value. It turns out it's not in in the future of the book of Philippians, it's actually, next slide, it was actually in the small paragraph right here in chapter 2. So I'm going to read chapter 2, and let's see if you could catch on to what he believes has the most value. Okay? Now, I'm using a different translation called the Message because it's easier to understand. Here we go. Jesus had equal status with God, but didn't think so much of himself that he had to cling to the advantages of status no matter what, not at all. This is what he's saying. Jesus is God. He has the status of God, right? And that means he has all the power in the world. He could do anything. He could snap his fingers and he could make things happen. Now, this all-powerful God became a human, came here, and he took his deity, his godness, and he put it on the shelf because to him, that is not the thing of most value. Okay, well, let's keep reading. Let's see how Jesus does this. When the time came, he set aside the privileges of deity. He's like, okay, the God card, I'm going to put it aside. I'm not going to use it right now. Took on the status of a slave, became human. So clearly, the thing about what Paul's saying here is when Jesus was walking this earth teaching people about what is most valuable, he never once taught anybody, your goal in life is to be more powerful. Your goal should be to be the most powerful person, the richest person in the world. He's like, he never did that once. As a matter of fact, to demonstrate that, he took his power, which is more powerful than any politician, any king, anybody out there, and he took that and said, I'm not going to use that. I'm not going to touch that. Instead, I'm going to lower myself to the level of a slave because it's there that I could express to everybody what is most valuable. Okay? He says this. Having become human, he stayed human. Meaning, he never once as a human being was he like, oh, I got to use my God card. Okay, I'm going to use it right now, just this once. He's like, no. He stayed human the whole time because if he reached for their God card, it would go against what he believes to be the most important thing in this world. An incredibly humbling process. He didn't claim special privileges. So what is it that's most important? Let's keep reading. Instead, what did he do? He lived a selfless, obedient life and died a selfless, obedient death. The worst kind of death, a crucifixion. He chose to live a life like everybody else's. He chose to live a life where he wasn't surrounded by riches. He chose to live a life where he could relate to people and focus on relationships. He didn't choose to be birthed into a world where he was living in a luxurious palace. He chose to be born in a manger to two teenagers who didn't know what they were doing. He's like, that to me is more important, right? So what did he do? He chose to love selflessly. He chose to connect with people rather than achieving power for himself. He decided to give it away to the people around him. And because he did that, therefore, right? Because he did that. Next slide. God lifted him high and honored him far beyond anyone or anything ever. God the Father looked at what his son did and said, that is exactly what I want you to do. This is exactly what is most important in life. So I'm going to take you, after you finish your whole thing, I'm going to take you and put you in the highest place. I'm going to give you the gold medal. I'm going to put you on the top of the podium to let everybody in the world know this is exactly what is most valuable. Let's continue. All created beings in heaven and on earth, even those long ago dead and buried, will bow in worship before Jesus Christ and call out in praise that he is the master of all, to the glorious honor of God the Father. Paul is making a really big deal here. He's like, let me just highlight everything that needs to be known, right? What he's saying is this. Jesus was rewarded for valuing the right thing. He could have easily said, I'm God, I could do whatever I want. But no, it's like he decided to show everybody what is most important, and he got it right, and the Father is like, Jesus, you got it right. I'm going to reward you. And what is that thing that Jesus focused on? Selfless love. Yeah, selfless love. Because Jesus focused on giving himself away, because Jesus focused on making sure that everybody on this, like the people who are sidelined in society are heard, and the people who are widows they're made sure to be plugged into a family of faith. Like all those, he focused his mission on making sure that every human being who has the image of God is seen and heard. He's like, that is what he did. And he laid his life down to do that. Now, I have a video clip I want to show you guys, but we're having technical difficulties with the audio. So what I'm going to do is we're going to play the video clip, and I'm going to talk the part, okay? I don't have it memorized, but it's a scene from Mulan. You guys know the movie Mulan? Yeah, good movies came out back then. Okay, so here, let me set up the scene for you guys. And I have to clear my throat when I do this too, but okay. Mulan is a part of a family. There's a father and mother, and she's the daughter. And in those days in China, the way that you bring honor or good reputation to your family, if you're a son, is you go to war and fight for your family. If you're a daughter, you get married to the right person. In the beginning of the movie, Mulan goes out and tries to get married to the right person. She fails miserably. And then she sings a song. And then eventually they find out there's this big invasion happening. So Mulan's like, okay, no, the way I'm going to honor my family is by pretending to be a son and go to war. And as she takes off, with a cool montage of her cutting her hair and all that kind of stuff. And then the father finds out, like, oh no, Mulan's gone. Oh, what should we do? We need to stop her because she's going to be killed by the enemy. And the father's like, no, if she gets found out by the army that she is a woman, she will be killed. It's like, oh no, what should we do, right? Okay. So it turns out Mulan's a pretty good warrior. She goes out and fights and she wins the war. The emperor is like, you have saved China. I'm like, whoa, like, how did you do that, right? Okay, so now this is the end of the movie. Mulan's coming home and you find out where her heart was this entire time. The reason why she did this whole crazy thing is because she wanted to bring honor to her family. The whole time the father's worried sick. He's like, oh, where's my daughter? Where's my daughter? Okay, so here we go without the audio. Okay, so here's Mulan coming in, and she has these things right here. These are things that's supposed to bring honor to her family. She's a war hero. The father realizes she's here. It's like, oh, Mulan. Oh, father, I have brought these things for you, these souvenirs, to bring honor to the family. Oh, and this too, to more honor to the family. And now I could bring honor to the family. Something like that. Okay. And then look what he does. He throws it to the side. This is garbage. This is Skubulon. And he says, Mulan, the greatest honor is having you as a daughter. Right? It's like, I missed you so much, Mulan. And big hug. It's like, I love you, or I missed you, something. Okay. And then, thank you. So much better than the movie. Yeah, okay. This is the father recognizing, I placed value on the wrong thing. Now, in the given culture, in a given time, in a given social circle, honor was so important. Having that good reputation in your family was really important. Super important. But now, it's like the father had a come to Jesus moment, right? He's like, oh, now I see what really has value. And that is that my daughter is still alive. That she is still with us. And he sees the things that she brought home, and he just tosses it to the side like it's garbage, like it's Skubulon. This is exactly what Paul's talking about. Mulan's dad's been putting things into the cup, like we need to do everything we can to make sure we bring honor to the family. And that's not a bad thing. Okay? Getting good grades, good thing. Okay, not a bad thing. You just keep doing it. But he put so much into this to a point where he pressured his daughter into thinking that that's such the most important thing in the world that I'm willing to sacrifice my relationship with my daughter. And at the end of the movie, he realizes the one that I didn't invest in that much, that was the thing that was the most important. And this is exactly what Paul means when he says this. He says, I consider all these things that I've been doing, memorizing the Bible, going to church, all that kind of stuff, all those things, garbage, that I may gain Christ and be found in him. It's like, when you know Jesus, you start to get the right perspective. You start to see what is the most important thing in life, and that's what we should be investing in. He ends this paragraph by saying this, and this is confusing, so I'll take a few minutes at the end to explain what it says. He's like, I want to know Christ. Paul is saying, at the end of this whole thing, this is what I realized. More than anything, I want to know who Jesus is. Yes, to know the power of his resurrection and participation in his sufferings, becoming like him is in his death, and so somehow attaining to the resurrection from the dead. You're like, what is he talking about here? What resurrection? Okay, Let me break it down so we all understand what Paul is saying here. He basically starts off by saying this: I want to know Jesus. Why? Because when I get to know Jesus, my eyes are opened, and now I see what is most important. I have better perspective, and that thing is love. I realize that while I've been investing a lot on being religious, the thing that is most important is love. How I treat other people and what kind of relationship I have with God, that is the most important thing. And because that's the most important thing, he comes to this next conclusion. If I want to learn how to love and invest in the right cup, then I want to learn how to love like Jesus. I want to be the kind of person that loves in the way that he did. But when you follow his life, Jesus' life, and you realize, how did Jesus love on other people? He did it by doing this. He did it by pouring his life out into the people around him. Eventually, it cost him his life. And Paul says, I want to know Jesus. And when I get to know Jesus, I know that love is the thing that matters most. But because I know that love is the thing that matters most, I want to love like Jesus. And because I know that this is how Jesus loves, I want to learn how to pour out my life, empty myself for the people around me. And if I do that, then I will be resurrected like Jesus. If I live my life like Jesus and give up my life like Jesus, then I'm going to be like Jesus in the resurrection. What is he talking about? There's this belief in Christianity that at the end, and Judaism, at the end of the story, there's a new world that opens up. That's called the resurrection. And he says, if Jesus is creating a world for us after this, that's supposed to be run by this one basic rule of love, and that's where Jesus is going to be, then if I live my life right here, right now, according to those principles, then when the resurrection happens, I will be a part of it just like he is. He's like, that is what I value most now. What I value most, everything else is garbage. What I value most now is to love like Jesus loved. So, right now in your life, depending on what stage you're in your life, if you're a student, getting good grades, hanging out with your friends, whatever sports you're involved in, that's important, do it. But don't neglect the other cup. Otherwise, one day you're going to look back and realize, this is all garbage now. Because I didn't invest any in the cup of being loving like Jesus is loving. Or maybe you're in college, and the only thing you can think about right now is making sure you get those good grades and get that internship and make sure you have those connections. That's great. Do that. Okay, well, I want to make sure you're successful. But don't neglect the other cup. Don't step on other people to get to the top, because that is not love. Maybe you're married and you're looking for, I need to buy a house or whatever, right? Sure, if you can, do it. Okay, that's great. But if you're neglecting love for the sake of achieving these other things, one day you're going to realize that everything you have is Skubulon. Whatever stage you're in right now, you have the thing that is value of this time in your life in the circle that you're in right now. And that's fine. But make sure you don't neglect the things that are more important, the things that have value from beginning all the way to the end. God values sacrificial love. God values sacrificial love. How does your cup look? Have you neglected? Have you been focused so much on getting ahead in life that you neglected the things that are more important? Let's close in prayer.